The sky didn't crack, it collapsed. Towers of flesh and fury rose from the horizon, titans marching with the wind of extinction in every step. Humanity had faced wars before, but never annihilation. Jets vanished like sparks, missiles barely scratched their skin, and entire cities fell in minutes. Hope wasn't fading, it was gone. Then, something impossible happened. A red streak tore through the burning sky. Not a weapon, not a machine, a man. Superman hovered above the ruins, eyes blazing, not with rage, but responsibility. For the first time, he wasn't just saving people, he was leading them. What if the world's strongest hero had to fight a war he couldn't end in seconds? What if every decision meant millions lived or died? This wasn't just a battle. This was humanity's final hour. And Superman had just become its last commander.
They came from beneath, not from the stars as humanity had always imagined in its science fiction fever dreams, but from the Earth itself, as if the planet had been pregnant with nightmares and finally went into labor. The first rupture occurred at 4:47 a.m. local time in Jakarta, a fissure that split the Jalan Tamrin highway and swallowed a night bus whole before anything could pull itself from the wound in the ground. By the time the sun touched the Indian Ocean, 7 more ruptures had opened across 4 continents, and the things emerging from them had already killed more people than any single war in human history. They were called Titans within the first hour, not because anyone sat down to name them, but because the word erupted simultaneously from 1,000 throats in a dozen languages, something ancient in human consciousness recognizing what stood before them. They were massive beyond comprehension, some hunched and ape-like with arms that dragged through buildings like cobwebs, others vaguely humanoid but wrong in proportions that hurt to observe, and a few that defied description entirely, geometries of flesh and bone that seemed to reject the physics around them. The first military response came from an Indonesian Air Force squadron that happened to be running dawn exercises. They diverted without waiting for orders and unleashed everything they had on the Titan pulling itself from the Jakarta rupture, their missiles painting the dawn sky with streaks of white before erupting against flesh that barely registered the impact, regenerating almost faster than it could be damaged, the creature's attention turning skyward for just a moment before one massive hand swatted 2 jets from the air with the casual irritation of someone brushing away mosquitoes. Within 3 hours, the global response had escalated to full military mobilization, but the word response implied they were answering the attack, when in reality they were simply reacting to an extinction event already in progress. Tank divisions rolled through city streets, still clogged with fleeing civilians, artillery batteries set up in parks where children had played the day before, and fighter jets from 17 nations engaged targets so large that missing was nearly impossible, yet hitting them meant almost nothing. In Mexico City, a Titan walked through the historic center, each footfall erasing centuries of architecture, and the Mexican Army's 1st Armored Brigade fired continuously for 43 minutes, recording over 200 direct hits before running out of ammunition. The creature's path never once deviated. The chaos was not uniform. It metastasized differently depending on geography, infrastructure, and the particular nightmare that had emerged in each location. New York's Titan moved with terrible purpose through Manhattan, and the island's density turned evacuation into a death sentence as bridges collapsed under the weight of exodus and tunnels became tombs when the creature's movement caused structural failures that trapped thousands in darkness and rising water. In contrast, the Titan that emerged outside Johannesburg moved more slowly, almost methodically, giving people time to flee, but also time to understand that fleeing might only delay the inevitable. Dr. Sarah Chen, a seismologist with the USGS, was in her Boulder office reviewing data from the Indonesian event when the 2nd rupture opened in Guatemala, and by the 3rd she had recognized something that made her hands shake as she typed her report. The ruptures weren't random. They followed tectonic patterns, ancient subduction zones, and fault lines, as if something had been buried along the planet's most fundamental scars and was now emerging in a coordinated global hatching. Her report never reached anyone who could act on it because the communication infrastructure was already beginning to fragment, satellites going dark not from attack but from neglect as the personnel who maintained ground stations abandoned their posts to save their families or simply gave in to despair. The governments that tried to maintain control found themselves governing populations that no longer believed control was possible. The President of the United States addressed the nation from a bunker beneath the Appalachian Mountains, her face a mask of composure that cracked only in the slight tremor of her jaw as she spoke about American resilience and the indomitable human spirit. But her words were interrupted by emergency broadcast signals as Seattle went dark mid-speech. In Geneva, what remained of the UN Security Council convened in a session that lasted 11 minutes before the delegates simply stopped talking, the Russian ambassador removing his headphones mid-translation and saying in English, clear enough for everyone to hear, "There is no point to this. We are discussing procedure while the world ends." He was right, but it was a rightness that no one wanted to acknowledge, because acknowledgement meant accepting that every system humanity had built, every hierarchy and protocol and chain of command had become irrelevant in the span of a morning. On the ground, soldiers discovered what it meant to fight something beyond their scale, not just physically larger, but operating on a level where their training became useless instinct. Corporal Marcus Webb, British Army, found himself screaming orders to his squad in the ruins of Birmingham, their SA-80 rifles cracking uselessly against a Titan that hadn't even noticed them. And he realized with sudden clarity that they weren't soldiers anymore. They were just prey with uniforms on, going through the motions of military discipline because it was the only thing keeping them from complete dissolution into animal panic. Some held anyway, not because they thought they could win, but because the alternative was abandoning the civilians still trapped in the rubble behind them, and that abandonment felt like a worse death than the physical one approaching. Others broke, and there was no shame in it, because what they faced was something evolution had never prepared consciousness to confront, the absolute certainty of irrelevance. Then, above the burning skyline of what had been Baltimore, something moved at a speed that registered on radar as a malfunction, a single object traveling at Mach 7, decelerating in ways that should have killed anything living. And when it stopped above the Titan tearing through the inner harbor, witnesses later struggled to articulate what they had seen, because hope arriving in physical form was not something human language had adequate syntax for. Superman hit the Titan with enough force to send it crashing backward through 3 city blocks, and for a moment the world itself seemed to pause in disbelief. He had been gone for so long. Theories about his absence ranged from death to abandonment to the possibility that he had never existed at all, mass delusion on a global scale. But here he was, real and immediate, and doing what no military on Earth had managed, actually hurting one of these things. The Baltimore Titan tried to rise, and Superman drove it down again, his fists moving faster than cameras could track, each impact creating shockwaves that shattered windows 2 miles away. And then he was gone, a sonic boom marking his departure as he streaked toward Philadelphia, where another Titan had just emerged. In the first hour of his return, he saved an estimated 40,000 people, not through grand gestures, but through 1,000 small interventions performed at impossible speed, catching a collapsing hospital before it pancaked on the patients inside, rerouting a Titan away from a packed evacuation corridor, pulling a school bus from beneath a falling overpass with seconds to spare. But even as he worked, he could feel the mathematics of the situation closing around him like a trap. There were 14 confirmed Titans now, soon to be more as new ruptures opened, and he was one person moving at finite speed across a spherical planet. Every second spent in Baltimore was a second not spent in Manila or Lagos or Sao Paulo, and people were dying in those places just as surely as they would have died here without his intervention. He had faced impossible odds before, fought beings of immense power, but those had been battles with defined enemies and clear objectives. This was triage on a planetary scale, and it was breaking something in him that had never broken before. At 30,000 feet, he stopped, hovering above the Atlantic as dawn broke across the curve of the earth below, and he opened his hearing to everything. The cacophony nearly overwhelmed him. Millions of voices screaming, praying, calling for help, saying goodbye, all layered over the deeper sounds of destruction, the groan of collapsing metal, the roar of fires consuming entire districts, the wet sounds of biological matter being crushed in quantities that registered as a continuous drone. But within that chaos, his mind began to sort patterns, picking out the structure beneath the noise. The Titans weren't wandering randomly. Their paths, when mapped, showed deliberate targeting of population centers, infrastructure nodes, and military installations in that order. They were being guided, or they possessed an instinctual understanding of how to most efficiently dismantle civilization. Either possibility terrified him, but it also meant they could be predicted, and prediction meant the possibility of getting ahead of them instead of constantly reacting. He descended toward NORAD, the command center buried deep in Cheyenne Mountain, and when he entered the operations room, every eye turned to him with an expression he had never seen before. Not worship or relief, but desperate calculation, as if he were a resource to be allocated rather than a person. General Amanda Hobbs, her uniform crisp despite 3 days without sleep, didn't waste time on pleasantries. "We're losing, not slowly, not maybe. We are actively losing this war. You've bought us time, but time for what? We can't kill them, we can barely slow them, and there are more coming." He looked at the display wall showing global Titan positions, trajectories, casualty estimates climbing past 50 million, and he said something he had never said before. "I don't know." The admission hung in the air like a confession. "But if we coordinate, if we stop trying to fight them everywhere at once and start forcing them where we want them, we might survive long enough to find out how to actually win." What followed was a compression of human adaptability that would have seemed impossible a week before. Military doctrine rewritten in real time, civilian infrastructure converted to strategic assets, every surviving government subordinating itself to a single unified command structure with one man at its center, not because he had sought that position, but because he was the only fixed point left in a collapsing world.
The strategy that emerged was brutal in its simplicity. Sacrifice space to buy time. Channel the Titans away from defendable population centers into kill zones where massed firepower could exploit the brief windows after their regeneration, and use Superman as a mobile intervention force to prevent catastrophic breaches. It worked, barely, trading cities for hours and hours for the possibility of days. Rome was evacuated and then abandoned. The Titan that claimed it occupied for 72 hours, while millions escaped northward through corridors held open by forces that suffered 80% casualties doing it. In Seoul, the military turned the Han River into a barrier, using demolitions that would have been unthinkable before, sacrificing the southern districts to buy time for the north. The civilian toll was incalculable, but it was less than the alternative, and that grim calculus became the new mathematics of survival. Superman felt every loss personally, each sacrifice a weight added to something inside him that had no limit to how much it could carry, but also no way to relieve the burden. He saved a girl from under rubble in Tehran. Her name was Yasmin, and she asked if her mother was dead, and he had to say yes, and then he was gone because Jakarta needed him. And later, when he tried to remember Yasmin's face, he couldn't quite hold it in his mind because there had been 10,000 Yasmins since then, each one entitled to more than the 3 seconds he could afford.
Then, on the 8th day, something changed. The Titan that emerged from the newest rupture in the Siberian plateau was different, larger, but more than that, present in a way the others weren't, as if behind its eyes something was actually looking back. When it moved toward Novosibirsk, it didn't shamble or charge. It walked with terrible purpose, and when Russian forces engaged it with everything they had left, it adapted mid-battle, changing its approach to minimize damage and maximize the destruction of their defensive positions. Reports reached NORAD within the hour, and Superman was already moving before the briefing finished, but part of him understood before he arrived that this was the answer to a question they should have been asking from the beginning. If the Titans were coordinated, what was coordinating them? He engaged the Alpha over what had been Novosibirsk, and the difference was immediately, horrifyingly clear. It fought back with strategy, predicting his movements, forcing him into exchanges that neutralized his speed advantage. Their battle carved a scar across central Russia, moving faster than ground forces could track. Two figures locked in combat that operated on a scale beyond human relevance. He had fought powerful beings before, but this was different. The Alpha wasn't trying to defeat him so much as occupy him, keeping him locked in engagement while the other Titans pressed their advantages elsewhere. And he realized with sick certainty that he was being used, turned into a liability by an enemy that understood him better than he had understood it. The fight lasted 3 days, moving across continents as neither could gain permanent advantage, and in that time, the global situation deteriorated catastrophically. Defensive lines, held only by Superman's periodic interventions, collapsed, evacuation corridors were overrun, and casualty estimates climbed past 200 million. General Hobbs sent him a message on the 4th day, tight beam transmission to a communicator he kept. "We can't sustain this. Whatever you're doing, finish it, or we won't have a world left to save." He broke off then, forcing distance between himself and the Alpha, and climbed to the edge of space where he could see the planet whole. The night side glowed not with cities anymore, but with fires, entire regions burning, and he understood that Hobbs was right. This had to end now, one way or another. He descended faster than he ever had before, building velocity until re-entry plasma surrounded him, and he hit the Alpha Titan with the accumulated force of a meteor strike, driving it through the crust and into the mantle itself, following it down into heat and pressure that would have vaporized anything less durable. In that deep place where the Earth's bones lay exposed, they fought without witness, and he finally found what he was looking for, a limit. The Alpha's regeneration faltered under sustained assault at temperatures that melted rock, and when he tore into its core, he found something that didn't belong in flesh, something mechanical and ancient and other. He crushed it, and the Alpha stopped moving, not dying because it had never been alive in the way that mattered, but ceasing. When he emerged from the crater his impact had created, the other Titans had stopped coordinating. Some wandered aimlessly. Others simply collapsed, and for the first time in 9 days, the number of active threats began to decrease. The war continued for weeks after, hunting down the remnants, but the existential crisis had passed. Humanity had survived, barely, reduced but not extinct. Later, when the count was finalized, they learned that 1,400,000,000 people had died, civilizations had ended, and the world map would need to be redrawn. Superman stood in what had been downtown Seattle, now a memorial field where nothing would ever be built again, and he wept for the first time since arriving, finally allowing himself to feel what he had held back to remain functional. A woman approached, one of the survivors helping with recovery efforts. Her name was Claire, and she had lost everyone, but kept working anyway, and she said, "Thank you for trying." Not "thank you for saving us," because she understood that trying had been all anyone could do, him included, and somehow that made it bearable. The world would rebuild, slower and smaller and haunted by what it had lost, but it would continue, and he would be there to help, carrying the weight of those he hadn't saved, alongside the determination to protect those who remained, forever changed by the war that had proven even gods could bleed, and survival was sometimes the only victory possible.